one of my first interesting experiences with the parks. After we left Orange and were into Galveston Bay, one of the original first shakedown things was to fire the guns, the five inch main battery and the 40 millimeter and the 20 millimeter. And of course, we were out in the bay and the guns were depressed so that the shells would hit the water and sink, not damage anybody or anything. And I had the control of all the starboard side. So I gave the firing command and they all started firing. And of course, once it was certain that everything was going to work, they were all going to fire. The captain said, "Ceasefire, ceasefire," and I'm on a phone on the bridge talking to a person in each area where the guns are. And I said, "Ceasefire, ceasefire," and the 20 millimeters right below me just kept firing. And I'm yelling, "Ceasefire, ceasefire," and the captain got really pissed. And he said, "Koester, if you can't stop those guns, I'll have to get somebody who can." That was my first experience with Morgan Slayton, the captain. Anyhow.
So were you just talking to one particular?
I was talking to one person who was in the area where the guns were. And he should have tapped the gunners on the shoulder and said, stop.
Yeah.
But either he did and they didn't, or he didn't and they kept going. So anyhow.
And that was his name. The captain was Slayton?
Morgan Slayton.
Morgan Slayton.
And
did you get disciplined in any way? Besides him yelling at you?
No, he just got pissed off.
I guess that
I think I was one of the better junior officers. Ultimately.
What was your rank at that point?
I was just ensign.
Okay.
One stripe. Ultimately, it was, when I got out, it was lieutenant junior grade, 1.5 stripes.
Okay. So during that, so that was near the end of the war.
Yes. By the time we went for shakedown, the war was over.
Yeah.
So we never fired a shot in anger. The ship was to be home ported in Hawaii. So we steamed to Pearl Harbor. And then ultimately we did some, we sailed to Pearl Harbor and went into Pearl one time and then back out for a main battery gunnery shoot. We were out all day firing at towed targets with the main 5-inch guns, and then we were coming back in, and fortunately I was down below in my bunk, so I had no responsibility. But Bobby Went, who was another young ensign who was the navigator was taking bearings on the wrong nav aid. He hadn't shifted from a large area chart to a small area chart, and so he was positioning the ship out of the channel, and the channel into Pearl Harbor was very narrow, or narrow-ish, and very steep. You were either in the channel or you were on the rocks. And so the ship wound up on the coral and wiped out the sonar dome and nicked the props and bent one of the shafts. And fortunately, as I said, I was down below, but so I had no involvement. But so there was a board of inquiry and all that stuff.
Of course.
And I felt really bad because Jack Kramer, who was my boss, the gunnery boss, was an academy man, and the captain was as well, and that did essentially limit their careers.
Oh,
They
not
both
destroy them.
Yeah, they both ultimately became captains and had really good careers. But Morgan Slayton wanted flag rank, admiral, and probably would have gotten it, but that destroyed his chances. So. Anyhow,
Is that something that should not have happened?
it shouldn't have happened. No, it was a whole series of small errors. The signalmen, which are behind the bridge and can see, weren't paying any attention. Jack Kramer, unfortunately, who was the officer of the deck, and he was apparently either didn't recognize that they weren't in the channel. Nobody noticed, but there were other ships, so somebody should have. And I always thought that probably no other vessel who was in the channel and recognized that the Parks wasn't headed in the right direction would have radioed to say, where the hell are you going?
But they didn't.
But nobody did, because probably the radio would have been heard all through the Navy command, and they didn't want to embarrass anybody. So anyhow, the greater embarrassment was going aground. So it took several hours to get off, and the ship was able to go to the dock under its own power, but lots of vibration. Fortunately, we were the flagship, and we had the Commodore on board our ship, a group of 4 ships, and the Commodore, I think, really felt bad about the happening and felt bad about the careers, and I think he went to bat for Jack and the captain, and so they got a letter of reprimand rather than a court-martial or anything else. So, but that went in their files. And interestingly, recent years I was going to reunions. I haven't been in several years. But the one wardroom officer from when I was on board the Parks was Bobby Wendt, and it was he who was the navigator that led the ship astray. And I saw him for several reunions. He subsequently has died, and I don't know that there are any other officers still alive.
So then you went back home.
Then in 1946, in March, the ship got as far as Hong Kong.
Oh, okay.
And that was great. And I had enough points at the time to get off and go home. And of course, I was anxious to get back to my wife. Well, of course, on the ship, everybody wanted to go home. I mean, most of the officers were reserve, like myself, and simply if they had enough points, and that was the basis to go, they all wanted to go home. The captain interviewed me, as he did all the others, and he really wanted me to ship over. I think I was a good junior officer.
I'm sure you were.
And no, I wanted to go home. The only of the junior officers that shipped over was the torpedo officer, Hadaway. And I don't know anything about him. But anyhow, I had to decide, as soon as the war was over, the Navy shifted back to peacetime. And one of the things that was required was that all the officers, particularly the junior officers, had to start what are called courses that you mail in.
Oh, doing online or what they
No,
call?
no.
Well,
At that time, it wasn't called online. Correspondence courses.
correspondence courses. And if you didn't have your lessons in, you couldn't go ashore.
Oh,
And I thought,
okay.
this is bullshit. Back to high school, for Pete's sake, which was one of the things that I didn't really like about the possibility of shipping over. So, anyhow, I guess I didn't care for the peacetime Navy.
Oh.
So,
So then you left the military.
I was
Reassigned.
reassigned to the Navy Reserve
Okay.
and discharged into the reserve in Seattle. And my wife's folks and Robin were living in Salem at the time. And there were 2 houses on the property. Come on in, Paul.
Hi there.
And so we lived in Salem sit down, Paul.
Yeah, good.
And for a couple of years. Paul wasn't born there. But Tim, my oldest, was born there. And so then I finished my college degree at Willamette University in Salem,
What did you get your degree in?
business administration. And then I graduated and worked in a sawmill, for Pete's sake, for a few months until we could go back to Southern California.
As far as your service was concerned, do you think it had any particular or salient influence on the rest of your life? Did it have any particular impact? Did it teach you something that perhaps you wouldn't have learned otherwise?
Not that I recall specifically. Maybe made me a little more organized. And maybe willing to be in a leadership situation. After I retired in 1982, I joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary and spent 22 years in that organization, the volunteer part of the Coast Guard. Teaching classes, I taught navigation and boating safety and so on. So maybe the Navy career oriented me
Perhaps.
somewhat to that. I don't know.
But you already liked the beach.
Oh yeah. Well, I like boats. And,
Anything having to do with
yeah, anything to do with the sea. In fact, you saw that's a radio controlled boat. And so Paul's older brother, Tim, has a radio controlled sailboat and I have one. And so we sail those.
Okay.
We can sit on the beach and stay dry.
You have to be very proud. I'm sure your children are very proud of you.
Well, I'm very proud of my boys. They're great guys.
Okay.
I'm so lucky to have 2 here. And they come every Tuesday night and we have happy hour here. And
Well, that's nice.
then we go down to the dining room for dinner.
Okay.
Then we play pool.
So where are you going today?
Just over to our house.
Okay. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, well, one of the ladies here, Joy, is having her 85th birthday.
Okay.
And her family's having a party. that she's invited some residents to. So I'm going to go to Paul's.
Of course.
And her son lives next door to me. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep you from having a good time. Thank you very much.